Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Strategy International podcast. This is the podcast produced for Strategy International, a global think tank and consulting firm that brings together great minds from all over the world that discuss, analyze, and collaborate on matters of global interest, such as international politics and policy, security, defense, the economy, environment, and much, much more. Of course, you can visit www.strategyinternational.org for all and any information on Strategy International. We have another great guest today with us. I'm excited to have a conversation with her. She's the founder and director of the International Protocol Institute of California. She's a renowned expert in the international, diplomatic, and corporate protocol industry. She has worked with some of the biggest companies and organizations worldwide, such as the UN, NATO, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Deloitte, the Qatar Petroleum, Port of Dubai, Dubai Airport, and chiefs of protocol from Kurdistan, Yemen, Bahrain. The list goes on. And she has also been a visiting lecturer at the University of San Diego, University of California, and San Diego and San Jose State Universities as part of their MBA program. Quite an impressive bio. We're welcoming today Marie Betts Johnson. Hi, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Hello, George. It's my pleasure to be here.
We're talking right before we recorded. I'm very excited to talk to you today because, and we've never done this. This is the first at Strategy International. We speak with so many experts on so many different fields, and we're talking about hands-on stuff that everyone gets to witness and to see up front, whether it's the war in Eastern Europe or developments in Asia or even in the US. But with you, what we're going to talk about is the behind the scenes. You're obviously an expert when it comes to protocol. And this is something for someone like myself who's worked in politics for a long time. I mean, we're aware of it. We know it's there. And it's great to have you on so that people can get a taste of what you do, your expertise, and how often you work behind the scenes. Nobody really gets to see you, but it's there. But if everything goes well, of course, nobody really notices, but it's such a crucial element in everyday politics or even in business with international events or local events. So I'm very excited to have you on.
Thank you so much.
How long? Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I always say that Shakespeare said the world is a stage, all the world's a stage, and the men and women merely players. Right. But we are the choreographers for those players on that stage. And one wrong move can cause an international incident. But we have to stay behind the scenes. And usually the projects are complex. We're actually doing a proposal now for a project that we need to go on site and research who are going to be on that protocol team. What is the training going to look like? There'll be different levels of training, and it'll be over a period of time. And so it can be quite complex. It's not just about handshakes and cocktail parties.
Mm-hmm. No, that's what everyone sees. What people don't see is how you get to the handshake. Let's talk about you a little, because there's a lot of things I want to ask you, but first and foremost, what's the International Protocol Institute of California? Tell us a little bit how it started, why it started. What's the mission?
Actually, our mission is to. We actually have executive presence. That's where we start, to train people how to present themselves, because that's ground zero. Then the corporate and the business etiquette part, there's different sections. And then the International Protocol Specialist Training, which is a 5-day training program. That's our flagship program. And so how did it start? Well, I grew up in Tipperary, Ireland. And Catholic boarding school, all of that. I wasn't a fan of the nuns, but I think they did a good job. And uh, and then I went to Jordan and worked for Their Majesties King Hussein and Queen Noor of Jordan. And I think that's where the seed was planted. I had the opportunity to meet with royalty from all over the world and visiting dignitaries. And at that age, I was in my 20s. I was totally flabbergasted by the whole thing. And it was a matter of just stand there and do the best you can. But I learned a lot. And after that, there's an expression that the people who mind don't matter and the people who matter don't mind. And I saw firsthand that the people who are something, they don't mind. You can make some mistakes and they're usually very gracious about it. It's only the people who don't matter, then they'll mind.
Right.
But that said, the media and the press will always mind. And I think that that's the biggest reason for protocol. You just cannot have things go wrong, no matter what. So there's a lot of pressure, and it's all about the details. And then I came to the US and studied marketing and merchandising and public relations. I think it's a matter of loving people and building relationships. We grew up with that in Ireland, even at the most fundamental levels. It's about respecting people, liking people, getting along with people. And, when it comes right down to it, that's what protocol is all about. It's just about respect in its simplest forms. But that respect, and particularly from diplomats, you can build trust. And having empathy to walk in the other person's shoes. This is how things get done. This is the alternative to war. And that's why I'm such a big fan of diplomacy. And then the latest thing is I did my master's degree in contemporary diplomacy through the Diplo Foundation and the University of Malta. And I'm happy to say, 1 week ago, I got my master's degree.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
I'm very proud. I learned way more than I thought I would. But it was wonderful experiencing digging into the lives of diplomats and what they do, because you can't have protocol without diplomacy. You can't have diplomacy without protocol. Mm-hmm. They carry out the policy, but we have to set the stage to make sure they're successful.
Right. I want to go back a little bit to that experience that triggered everything for you working, over at the former king of Jordan. That must have been something quite amazing. I mean, you mentioned the fact that you're receiving dignitaries, even other royal families as well. How was that experience? And of course, you're going into a country where culturally, it's very much different from anything that you have probably experienced in Europe. Definitely something that we've experienced over here across the Atlantic. How do you cope with that new reality? And your job, I'm guessing, as a staffer, you were sort of associated to his protocol team or to the events organization. I mean, that must have been something quite spectacular to realize. That whole machine that it takes to put these things together, taking into account these cultural differences that may exist.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was quite a culture shock, I must admit. But once I got to know the Jordanians, they were so hospitable. But again, thankfully, growing up in Ireland, where everybody's invited in for tea, in the Middle East, you're invited in for coffee. And it's a matter of sitting down, having those cups of coffee and getting to know people. They're more than happy to get to know you. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we saw the, I would say, there's several sides, there's several aspects to living in a Middle Eastern country. But of course, we did our research before we went, and there was a group of us. So we explored together. And it was great. We've made lifelong friendships. And then, of course, meeting Their Majesties, King Hussein was so down to earth. You'd never know he was a king. He never, but he had that sense of presence. He didn't have to show that he was. And Queen Noor was more than gracious. There were moments, of course, when it wasn't. Culture shock hits no matter who you are or where you are. And in those days, I don't think I knew as much as I know now. I think I would be much more equipped now after doing a program on cross-cultural relations. I should know more now. But again, once they weren't that different to the Europeans, and they had their religion, and we have our religion, and so it was quite, for the Irish, it was easier than we'll say from the people who were there from the US. I think it was easier. We were more conservative.
Right.
And it helped.
How do these cultural differences, do you think, the differences and of course the traditions, how does that impact the diplomatic protocol and all the preparations? Like, what goes into it, and whose traditions and culture do you take into consideration? The host, the guest, somewhere, you meet down the middle. What's the whole mechanics with that?
Great question. It's different for every country, and it's different for every guest. I have a great story about President Rouhani, who was the Iranian president back in 2016, after they had signed the nuclear disarmament deal. The Iranians, it was decided that they would go to Europe, build the trade relationships between France and Italy. And so a trip was planned. And President Rouhani first went to Italy, and the Italians pulled out all of the stops, and their protocol policy was, okay, it might be offensive if the Iranian delegation would see the nude pictures of that was such in the museums.
The sculptures, yes.
The sculptures, thank you.
Yeah.
In the museums. And of course, they draped all of the sculptures, and they put barriers around them. Number two, they didn't serve wine with dinner or lunch. And can you imagine the Italians not serving wine? And so the Iranians were very pleased, and the talks went well. However, the Italian public were not pleased.
Right.
They were outraged that their traditions were not adhered to. And compare that with when he then went on to France and met with Francois Hollande.
Yeah.
And my gosh, the French said, we're having wine with lunch, we're having wine with dinner, to heck with this cultural awareness. And the fallout was the people of France were very happy, but the Iranian delegation did not show up for lunch. So the talks didn't go very well. Now that's a great example of policy. It was the policy of the French to do that, and protocol people have to follow the policy that's mandated. And but the French people were not happy, and the Iranians were happy in Italy. Excuse me. And so it's complicated. You can't please everybody. But at the end of the day, my theory is, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So if I'm a guest, or if there's a visiting delegation, you're supposed to be open-minded and let them entertain you in the best manner they know how. We'll say that's one thing about the Middle Easterns. They'll pull out all the stops to make sure that you have everything you need.
But they're also quite strict on you respecting their culture. I remember another visit. I can't remember where when it was, but it was Mrs. Le Pen from France. I think she went somewhere in the Middle East, and she wanted to go into a mosque, and she didn't want to wear a veil, and it was it made international news because finally they didn't allow her in. Maybe she went to get the clip. Who knows? I don't know what the story was behind it. But the point I'm trying to make is that, when dealing with countries in the Middle East, they may go all the way out to please their guests, but at the same time, they demand that there's a certain respect to their cultures and their traditions.
Absolutely. In Jordan, it wasn't quite so. Jordan is very cosmopolitan, actually. Right. Amman, Jordan. But if I was in Saudi Arabia, for sure, I would probably wear the veil. But why not? I mean, that's their tradition, that's their culture.
Right.
And I'm not going to go in there and try to change it to be my way just for a visit. That's not respectful of the visitor or the people receiving you.
Right.
So I think that I think a lot of people, when they go to Saudi Arabia in particular, they will wear the veil, or Iran, because they're much more fundamental and strict.
How much do you think that protocol impacts diplomatic relations between countries? I mean, obviously, in the examples you gave, and there's many more, I'm sure that you can give us. But do you think that the way that France decided to organize those meetings had an impact in the end result?
Yes, I do think so. I think that the Iranians were much more comfortable in Italy. Obviously, the talks went much more smoothly. Then in France, they didn't join them for dinner at all, and that's where you have a chance to build relationships.
Right.
And so I don't, it's a catch-22. It's what is mandated. Are we going to? I'm sure that a lot of thinking went into that. A lot of people sat around the table and said, "Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that?" And they must have known what the fallout would have been. So that was their choice. However, who are you going to please?
Right. And I'm sure that protocol definitely has an influence on the behavior of the diplomats during these official visits and these meetings.
Oh, absolutely. It was President Biden went to Saudi Arabia not that long ago to encourage them to produce more oil. And when he met what is MBS, he went and he did a fist bump when he met him at the palace. And I would have advised not to do that, even though, of course, it was coming right out of the pandemic. However, the visual perception was not good. You don't walk up to somebody and give them a fist bump, even at that level, particularly at that level. And then, of course, when you go to Asia, it depends on how low you bow, or maybe not bowing lower than the Japanese or the Chinese, for instance, and knowing that you want to keep everything on a level equal.
There was you sent me a bunch of material to help in preparation of this episode, and I was looking through it, and I saw a picture that you had, and everyone will remember it because it was such a shocker. And that was when this migration crisis first occurred after the Syrian war, and obviously we had this situation with Turkey, and they wanted funds from Europe to secure refugee camps, etc. And there was a meeting in Turkey with the European officials, and I believe it was the president of the European Commission. They had her sitting on a sofa so far away from the Turkish president, who was sitting literally next to, I think, the president of the European Parliament. And I remember that picture going around, making international news, and thinking, how is she still sitting there? And you understand, with more of a Western culture, there is no woman in a position of power that would have ever even accepted that, because, I mean, the visuals were so strong.
Yes, they were. It was called Sofagate. She was relegated to the sofa when her colleague, Charles Michel, he actually took the seat on the right of the president, which is the seat of honor, but which was not very chivalrous to start with. And then she was relegated to the sofa. You could tell she was a little surprised. One doesn't know what to do in that case, but she handled it very well. She could have stalked out of the room, but she didn't.
Right.
But she sat it out, and actually the court of public opinion really took her side, though. So she actually won. She won the day. And then Charles Michel was lambasted really on the media. And then he came out with some sort of explanation like, oh, that's the very, very proper Turkish protocol. No such thing, obviously. So had he done the right thing, he would have done damage control. He would have come out and apologized. and all would be well. But no, he did not do that. So he should have done that. And then who to bless and who to blame? Which protocol people? Was it her protocol people didn't set it up properly? Was it the Turkish people didn't set it up properly? Was it policy? Was that already, like in France and Italy, was it set up ahead of time? Was it meant to be a slight? Was it signaling something to her? She actually was going to have the Turkish did not want to be part of the Convention on Human Rights for Women.
Mm-hmm.
That was her mission. And so again, human rights for women in Russia might not, or Turkey rather,
Mm-hmm.
might not be top of mind for the Turkish president. So he was sending a message.
But you open the door to an interesting concept there, because it's not just one team organizing these visits and the entire protocol. Every politician, I'm assuming the European delegation was probably under the umbrella of one protocol team, but then you have to deal with the protocol team in Turkey. So they must have known that the woman is going to sit on the couch, and anyone can imagine those conversations happening where it's like, what are you talking about? Can we not have 3 chairs, for example? And I'm just trying to imagine that conversation, that back and forth between those two chiefs of protocol. It must have been quite spectacular.
It was really insane when you think about it, how something like that can happen.
Because there's no way that they went there and surprised you're sitting on the couch.
No. So it looked like it was meant to be, that was the message that they wanted to send.
Mm-hmm.
It's protocol can be fascinating. You mentioned something about the protocol teams there are the advanced teams. Supposing I was going to Turkey, an advanced team, if I were the president, an advanced team would go ahead of time and meet with the protocol people in Turkey. And that's when all the arrangements are made. And in our 5-day program, I talk about understanding cultures, because leadership changes. People lead in different ways, in different cultures. And we have to know that, because you're leading a team and you're working with another team from another culture. So you have to understand their leadership style to get cooperation. And of course, the cross-cultural tenets, one tenet is a big one. It's called time management. How do people value time? Some people are multi-focus in that they do a lot of things at once, and other people are single-focused. It's one thing at a time, and that would be the US, because time is money. But in other parts of the world, they might be building relationships. They might be playing a round of golf before the meeting. Right. And they have much more. I wonder, is it like that in Greece? A little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there must be some sort of protocol team there, but I've never worked with them. I've never seen them, but I've been part of certain meetings with Canadian parliamentarians in Greece, and it worked flawlessly. But everyone, I remember everyone was just very relaxed, very chill. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it, kind of thing, Nothing official. I mean, they weren't going for trade negotiations. It was just official visits, right? Parliamentarians from Quebec of Greek origin going to Greece. And I guess for them, it was just plug and play. Okay, they're coming. This is what we're going to do. It was pretty standard. It was a repetitive activity that would happen every 2 years. So for them, it was, okay, this is what's going to happen. Let's just figure out the program. So I think it was much more focused on content rather than who's coming and where they're going and how things are going to work out. I think that had already been planned over the years, and they had it down to a science, right? So it worked well. But I do have to highlight that they're always very relaxed when you're dealing with them. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. So again, I don't know what's happening behind those scenes. If last minute everyone is scrambling and rushing, but from our end, it was always seamless.
Yeah, I think it's the culture. The Canadians are they're very laid back, and the US are very laid back. It's also generational. I don't think millennials are quite as conservative or formal as perhaps the baby boomers, and then they got more formal even before that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a generational difference, and also in the old days, diplomats would only deal with other diplomats, and they all grew up in the same way. They went to the same schools, so they understood each other. Now diplomacy is network diplomacy. We have to interact with scientists, economists, and specialty diplomats.
Right.
So they come from everywhere, and they all come, particularly the more would you say technically efficient diplomats. They might not be big on relationship building.
Right. It's just pure content. Give me the
pure
paperwork.
content.
Let's read.
Yes, it's pure content.
So how has protocol evolved, over time, especially in the field of diplomacy? I mean, you mentioned, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 years ago, it was diplomat to diplomat, let's arrange. And now there's all these intermediary people that are just running to make sure that everything is okay. How has that evolved over the years?
Well, it has evolved, and it's evolving very quickly. As I said, the protocol in the baby boom generation was much more formal than it is now in the millennials, and it'll be less formal with the Gen Zs. However, it's becoming, everything is becoming more technical. We've got AI and ChatGPT, and the effects of that on diplomacy, and hence protocol, will be huge, because there's a big danger of a breakdown in communications because of they can even mimic voices, your voice. I mean, all of that, and for diplomacy, I worry about that. So that will affect protocol. It will affect how we set up meetings. Will things be in place, or will we get messages that are counterproductive and that are very believable? So I think protocol and diplomacy is getting much more complex than it was, and to me, worrisome.
Right. I want to go back to what you said about the advanced teams, and this is another group of people that nobody sees, right? They kind of work behind the scenes, but they're everywhere, and they have to make sure that everything is so perfect. And I remember a moment, here years ago, we were campaigning here in Quebec, and in the particular district that we were organizing, there was the visit of the Quebec premier. He was going to come. It was a big rally, and it was the electoral, the campaign headquarters that we were in charge of. And his advanced team walks in, and they were in charge. They were just pointing fingers and saying things. And we were just there taking notes, and this is our space. They came over and they completely took over. They walked in like, these desks, they all leave. I don't want any cables, phones, computers disappear. And these people have this expertise, and they were able to see that the roof, like the ceiling, was lower towards the back than it was in the front of the room, and their eye picked it up. And they actually measured. And I was like, why are you measuring? Like, what difference does it make if it's, I don't know, a couple inches shorter in the back than it is in the front? And they took, they took these details from A to Z, every possible thing that they had to look at. They looked at it. Even the streets, they brought us a map. They told us, give us the directions. All the streets, like in a radius of 5 kilometers, what direction do they go? And I was thinking, it's not that dangerous. Like, what can possibly happen? But they can't take this. They can't take this risk. In fact, another fun story, because that district that I worked in provincially is the exact same district that Justin Trudeau wins at the federal level. And Justin Trudeau became the Prime Minister of Canada. He won the leadership of his party, but he represents that exact same district where we were, but at the provincial government. And we were used to working with his teams very often, and it was all very relaxed, right? Because he was just an elected official like everyone else before being prime minister. So everyone was pretty much, used to certain organization and certain things, and nobody was concerned about potential dangers. And in that same district, every year, it's the huge parade. The Greek Independence Day parade happens in that district because there's a huge percentage of Greek population. And the first year that he became prime minister, it was something out of a movie. We got there, and obviously you have all the dignitaries and all the elected officials, and then Justin Trudeau arrives, and all of a sudden we see snipers on rooftops, and there's like dozens of people camouflaged and dressed in regular clothes walking around. The cops were, it was this team of hundreds of people, and we were all thinking, relax, nothing is going to happen. But they can't think like that.
Yeah, but if those measures are not in place, then somebody who has nefarious intentions,
yeah, let's say
just
something
decide,
does, let's say
yeah, they
something
have
does
to,
happen.
yeah, they have to give the impression that, you know what, don't even try it. So that's why that's all the details have to be covered. And actually, the proposal we just did, you know, on a protocol team, it's like an umbrella. You have to have director of transportation, director of security, director of small events, director of the big events, director of the opening ceremonies, director of the closing ceremonies. As I say, I've just done it for this is a 20-page proposal for all of that. And I'm just looking here.
Well, that's interesting. Let's go on that. You're organizing an event. What are the main steps that you're looking into? Let's say you have a state visit, like an official visit, maybe not a head of state, but a minister or a prominent figure in government coming. They're going to discuss any agreement or negotiation, whatever. What goes through your mind? What are those main essential elements that you need to check, like all those little boxes?
First thing is who's coming, what's their rank, obviously the flight information, do they have medical issues, will there be security, will there be a problem bringing guns or arms through the airport, again, who's in the delegation, when they arrive, will they need anthems, will there be a receiving line, will there be a red carpet? Actually, there's a good story one protocol person told me, and I won't tell you who he was, that everything was ready and the presidential plane was about to land. The red carpet flew up because it was very windy.
Oh, no.
Things happen.
Yeah.
And the dignitaries, it's all precedence then. Who's going to be in the line of who's going to meet the visiting dignitary? And then they'll have a speech, perhaps, or talk, at least a welcome talk at the airport right there. And then, of course, you go to the motorcades and then the security that's involved in that. Who goes first? Do they know the routes? Are the drivers trained not to talk or what to say or not to say anything? Sometimes they say things. And I have a lot of stories on that, too. We had actually 96 ambassadors visit us here in San Diego, and I was on the protocol team. And again, we had the transportation, we had the events, the security, just trying to think of the different roles we on media, of course, that's a big one. And so they all decided to come together. At the beginning, they said they'd come in different flights. So we had to scurry around and get every car, every Uber, every possible means of transportation to pick them up at the airport. And there was no time to train the drivers. So there was an ambassador coming from an Asian country, and the driver of the limousine got out. We picked them up in the tarmac, and she said, "Are you the little lady from such and such a country?"
Yeah.
Believe me, I heard about that like that. Oh, you just never know.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. It's best not to talk. Just open the door.
Don't say anything.
Exactly.
But you can't blame her because we're very casual here in the US.
Right. Yes.
And she had no idea. And so, things will happen. There was no time to talk to them. There was no time to train them. So that's why protocol can make you old very quickly.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And in addition to that giant puzzle that you need to think of and to make sure that all the pieces at least need to be somewhere, at arm's length, right? That you can instantly just fix your puzzle. But then in addition to that, there's also the local authorities. I mean, you're mentioning traveling in cars and routes. I mean, are the roads open? Are they closed? Is the police collaborating? Can we close certain roads to facilitate the the driving. There's so many things that need to go. Like on average, what does your team look like? How many people do you manage are involved in such an operation?
It depends on the operation. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10. It really depends on the level of operation. They're all different. Is it an official visit? Is it non-official visit? Is it a state visit? There's different levels of visits. And I was thinking back to something you said about the details in a room that they look at. Another one is air conditioning. Oh. Will the air conditioning vent come towards the principal, or will it be away from them? Right. That's just a little taste.
But see, it's a little detail. The ideal situation is that no one notices.
No one notices, but that's the whole thing.
But if nobody notices, it means things went well. Because if it's too hot or if it's too cold, it means that something wasn't thought about properly, right?
Absolutely. And on another occasion, actually during that visit of the 96 ambassadors, we had the events in private homes, beautiful palatial homes here in San Diego. And everything was going swimmingly. At a breakfast, everybody was sitting around the pool. We had chosen the colors of the tablecloths. Everything was set up just beautifully. And the umbrellas. And next thing was, I looked to my side and I saw a little bit of a scuffle. I thought, oops. One of the ambassadors' wives had fallen off the chair.
Oh, boy.
And of course, ran over, apologies everywhere, red faces everywhere. But this was early days. And what I learned from that is in an event, particularly where you have rentals, this was a rental. It wouldn't happen at a conference like the UN or something like that, where you have, everything is beautifully laid out. But in something like that, I learned that I will sit on every chair.
Oh, wow.
Or I'd have someone on my team sit on every chair. That's not going to happen in my lifetime again.
Yes.
But you earn your stripes.
Tell me a little bit about the political message that could be sent through protocol. Again, you sent me a picture as an example where it was the crowning of the new king, that ceremony, and obviously with the U.S., there's never been a president that has gone to any ceremony because of the history, but President Biden did send his wife and his granddaughter, and you sent me a picture where they're sitting all the way at the very last seat. You would imagine that the wife of the American president would have some sort of priority, perhaps not in the first row or second, but maybe third, or I don't know, somewhere in the front. What kind of that must have been done on purpose as well, right? I mean, it can't just be a surprise. Oh, we forgot about you, Mrs. First Lady. Here, let's add 2 more chairs somewhere in the back.
I know it seems strange, didn't it? I asked about that actually, and it could have been termed it was unofficial because she was there unofficially when she was not there with the president. That's one explanation. Another explanation could have been, maybe something with Prince Harry. He's living in America, and perhaps there was some, there's a rift in the crown. So maybe it had something to do with.
But isn't there?
But it was strange. It was strange.
It's definitely strange. It's definitely strange because you would imagine there's like an order of importance of foreign dignitaries coming. And even though the president of the United States isn't there, the fact that the first lady is coming, she's not elected, she's not the president, but it's still the president's wife. So somewhere down the importance and in the protocol, she must fit somewhere, right?
Oh, she should. Well, in my opinion, she should have. But also, they may have been a little miffed that the President Biden didn't go. I mean, this is huge. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event.
Yeah, but that shouldn't have come as a surprise because everyone knew that has never happened before because of the historic past, and even though relations are I don't think they could be any better. Symbolically, at least that's what the media portrayed over here. They made it seem as though Don't worry, you won't see the president of the United States, but it's completely normal because of such and such reason, right? So I think the media kind of laid
Yes.
out, laid the facts out beforehand so that they can control people's expectations. I don't know in other countries how that was perceived, but over here in Canada, I think the media did a good job in preparing everyone not to see the president because of whatever history, and they kind of downplayed it as if it wasn't that important for the president to be there. But
Yes.
his wife will be there, so they kind of counterbalanced it with that. But when I saw the picture you sent me, I was like, Jesus Christ! I mean, what is she doing in the back? I mean, I would think in the order of importance, she would have some role or some better seating arrangement.
I think it was. I think the U.S. lost face in that instance, and the media tried to smooth it out, and not make it look as severe as it really was, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. There's a funny story, and the Greeks definitely remember this. It was when the previous government was in power, with Prime Minister Tsipras, and he was receiving the Israeli Prime Minister. It was Mr. Netanyahu,
Ah,
and this was. We even got this clip over here in Canada on Greek television. It was so absurd. It made news over here, where they hadn't prepared for the translators. So, and this was direct, right? So normally in events, from my experience, they're usually in a booth somewhere. There's an earpiece. You have
mhm.
professional interpreters, and they get it right away. For some reason, I don't know why, they had translators live on the side somewhere. You couldn't see them. And so the Greek prime minister was talking in Greek, and he was pausing for his interpreter to say it in English for Prime Minister Netanyahu to understand. And at some point, there's this block, and he couldn't remember the words. He couldn't, and it was so embarrassing. It was so awful to the point where the Prime Minister Netanyahu just said, "Look, just let's go on. Don't worry about it." And he just, it was so embarrassing, and immediately I just thought, "Oh, damn, that protocol team messed up big time."
No, it's very important. Obviously, there's simultaneous and there's consecutive um, translation. Simultaneous, they're getting this, they're getting it all at once because they have the earphones on.
Mm-hmm.
And consecutive, then there's a time lag. And so by the time they get to the next question, then they've forgotten what the former
Right.
question was. That's what you're saying. And that is, of course, at that level, that should not have happened.
Tell me a little bit. You mentioned some challenges going forward with the advent of artificial intelligence and Chat GPT and all these things. Now that we can alter people's speeches, what do you see going forward? Like the next 5 years, how is this industry, if you want, how is this domain going to get impacted, either positively or negatively?
I think already, and I'm not harping on millennials or Gen Z, I think they already have issues with building relationships, because they grew up on the internet and they have the phones. They're attached to the phones. You walk down the street, they're just looking at their phones.
Mm-hmm.
So, just building relationships, I think, is the lifeblood of diplomacy. Number one. So that's an issue already. So then they have, then along comes all of the messages online, virtual meetings. Virtual meetings are great and they were fabulous during the pandemic, but they didn't give people time to build relationships. There's nothing like meeting in person.
For
Nothing
sure.
like it. Not,
Mm-hmm.
and even with diplomacy, it's that side chat or back channel chat that might move things along.
Mm-hmm.
And so if everything's going to be virtual, there's no chance to do something like that. So that's even before we get to AI. And AI, of course, it's going to have wonderful attributes, I mean, medically and in other ways. However, my sense and my fear is that once it gets out of control, then we can't communicate accurately messages, and that can totally disrupt diplomacy. And, all it takes is one wrong message, and then, the consequences could be dire. I'm not, I have to say I'm worried about it. And I hope they put the guardrails on it. And they're working on it here in the US, and they're working on it in Europe. My sense is, but are they working on it in other parts of the world, or are they just going ahead to use it any way they decide that will be to their benefit? And that's, I just hope, I just have to try to be optimistic about it, but it does worry me.
I want to wrap it up. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I want to go back to that master's degree that you just completed in contemporary diplomacy. What's the deal with what is contemporary diplomacy? How much has it changed so that there is a master's program given on understanding contemporary diplomacy? Is everything that you just mentioned now included in this? Like, how do we understand diplomacy going forward?
Yeah. Well, an example would be, we did internet governance. Now, I never thought, I'm not technically bent. I had avoided if I could, but I have to, obviously. But we did internet governance. And that was where I learned about all the undersea cables and the tech industry and social media, how it works, and the politics behind it too. And consider this, I think I don't know how many cables down the undersea cables. However, just have one of them disrupted, there's diplomacy already. Was it intentional, or was it just a breakage? And then, of course, there's net neutrality. Some countries want to have their own internet. And cutting it off from the rest of the world. Again, that's that affects diplomacy. Another course was multilateral diplomacy, and that was a fabulous insight into how things worked at the United Nations and the Security Council. Actually, in particular, was interesting because here we have the members of the Security Council. I think it's 5, and you're trying to get something passed, but if there's the Chinese are there, the Russians are there, the US are there, they'll only pass what's in their interests. So nothing ever gets passed in the Security Council.
Right.
No, nothing. But still, the UN is the anchor for peace in the world. There isn't anything to replace it. But how effective is it? It really depends on how you view it. So we learned a lot about that. And then the language of diplomacy, I found this one really, really I loved this class. This was, it's how what you say can be interpreted or misinterpreted. How do you persuade people? How do you make an argument? And particularly in interviewing situations, being prepared for all kinds of eventualities, because you'll have the interviewer that really is out to get you. And how are you going to counter that? I found that's fascinating. That's so necessary in all areas of diplomacy. And the last course was on public diplomacy, and that was the influence of media, social media, and how it influences not just the public diplomacy in the host country where the diplomat is, but also the public diplomacy in their home country. So, it really was, I will say it was worthwhile. It was a lot. And then my thesis was on our diplomatic academies meeting the needs of the modern diplomat. And I honed in on emotional intelligence. In fact, that's what I forgot to say when I think of the protocol in the future. Emotional intelligence is something that it would have been assumed that diplomats have it. But if you never got the chance to build it, if you've always been online, you don't build those skills of self-awareness, self-regulation, how to build trust, building relationships, all of those things. So now my theory was it needs to be included in diplomatic training programs.
Right.
Anyhow, that led to that, and then here it is.
Before we wrap up, Marie, tell me a little bit what are you working on right now, and where can we direct people to follow you and to see up close the great work that you're doing?
Thank you. Well, the 5-day Train to be an International Protocol Specialist is here in San Diego, and it's in September 11th to the 15th. And we hope to have a good turnout for that of chiefs of protocol, people in business, entrepreneurs. It's open to everybody that really wants to understand culture, protocol, corporate etiquette. And then, of course, VIP, hosting VIPs. But I also was the former director of the international relations for the World Trade Center here in San Diego.
Okay.
So this is where the business aspect comes in. We had delegations come through, and then how to entertain them and also know all about the companies here in San Diego. You're a matchmaker. Put them together. And set up the meetings for them. Again, it nurtures success for negotiations. And then you create relationships where you affect the economy of the region.
Of course.
That was one of my favorite jobs too.
We're going to make sure to link that in the description for anyone interested in following you more closely, and of course your institute. I want to thank everyone again for tuning in, and of course feel free to visit www.strategyinternational.org for all the beautiful work being done over there. Marie, thanks again for coming. It was really great to talk to you, and and for you to lighten up our listeners and our viewers on this very important work that is done behind the scenes.
Thank you so much. Remember, it's not about handshakes and cocktail parties.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again.
Much.
We'll see you again in the next episode. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.